The stagecoach groaned to a halt, spitting dust and passengers into the quiet of Iron Creek. Jasper Cole stood with his collar turned up against the autumn bite, a knot of dread in his stomach tighter than any hangman's noose. This was his sister Lydia's doing, a mail-order bride procured without his consent and delivered like a shipment of supplies. "You're haunting that ridge, Jasper," her last letter had scolded. "A man wasn't meant to be a ghost. It's time to let life in." He watched the passengers disembark, a drummer with a sample case, an elderly couple, a weary mother shushing a fretting child, and then her. She was the last to step down, and she did so not with weariness, but with a contained energy that seemed to charge the air. She stood 5'4", her hair pinned practical, though rebellious copper curls fought free around a face that was all sharp, intelligent angles. Her gaze, a startling storm green, swept the platform, cataloging exits and faces with a calm assessment that put Jasper's teeth on edge. Those eyes landed on him, pinned him where he stood, and she strode over, no hesitation, her worn satchel clutched in a firm grip. "You're Jasper Cole," she stated. Her voice held a Missouri lilt, but it was underpinned with iron. He fumbled with his hat, the social graces rusted from disuse. "Ma'am, don't ma'am me like I might faint. I've ridden 600 miles. I'm not here for fairy tales." Her eyes performed a swift, brutal audit of him. His worn coat, his calloused hands, the stubborn set of his jaw. "Your sister's letters were plain. Food, shelter, safety. In return, I cook, clean, mend, and work. Nothing more, nothing less." It was exactly the arrangement he would have dictated himself. So why did it feel like a sentence being passed? The wagon ride up to his ridge was a journey of silent tension. The gold of the aspen groves and the dark of the pines did nothing to soften the space between them. "How far from town?" she asked, her voice the first sound in miles, beyond the creak of the wagon and the sigh of the wind. 8 miles. Closest neighbor is 3 north. "How often do you go down?" "Monthly, less in winter." He noticed how she held her satchel, not with care, but with a possessive tightness, as if it held her entire world. It gaped open as they hit a deep rut, and he saw it wasn't filled with lace and frippery. He glimpsed neat bundles of dried herbs, rolls of clean linen bandages, and the dark, serious glass of medicine bottles. "You carry a surgeon's kit?" he asked, the question torn from him by surprise. A shudder came down over her expressive face, her posture stiffening. "Old habits," she said, her tone final. "My mother was a healer. I learned enough." The door on that topic was closed, locked, and bolted. The cabin perched on the granite lip of the ridge, a testament to stubbornness. Logs were tight chinked, the chimney drew true, and the glass panes he'd hauled up one by one shone in the late afternoon light. It was not pretty, but it was sure. She surveyed it from the wagon seat like a general inspecting a captured fort. Inside, it was as he'd left it, clean, organized, and built for one. A stone hearth, a cast-iron stove, sturdy shelves, and a single narrow bed behind a faded curtain. "Where do I sleep?" she asked, her gaze going directly to that bed. Heat crawled up his neck. "I'll set a bedroll by the fire." "For how long?" The question hung in the air. They were married in-law by proxy, Lydia standing for him back in Missouri. But law and living were different countries. "Until you're ready," he said, the words feeling inadequate. She turned those piercing green eyes on him. "You're not what I expected. Your sister called you a wild hermit. I expected a desperate man who'd demand his rights. But a man who built this." She gestured to the solid, hand-hewn beams. "Ah! Doesn't beg. He takes." "I don't take what isn't offered," Jasper said, his voice low. A faint, almost mocking smile touched her lips. How noble. She moved to the hearth, running a finger over the rough stone of the mantel. "I'll be honest, Jasper Cole. I didn't come for love. I came to leave Missouri. My husband is dead. He left me with nothing but a ruined name. This marriage was the cleanest door out. It should have comforted him, this blunt practicality. Instead, it felt like a warning he couldn't yet decipher. The skirmishes began at dawn. She rearranged his kitchen, declared his pantry a disgrace, and replaced his familiar wooden bowls with fine china from her trunk. Jasper watched, his jaw working, a stranger in his own home. "You'll grind those teeth to dust," she noted on the third day, placing a plate of fluffy golden flapjacks before him. They were light, buttery, and the best thing he'd tasted in a decade. "They're edible," he grunted, refusing to give her the satisfaction. She laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Be still, my heart. If you wanted flattery, you should have married elsewhere." "Maybe I should have," he muttered into his coffee. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes cooled by 10 degrees. "But you didn't, so we're stuck with each other." Stuck. The word lingered in the air long after he'd left for the traplines, poisoning the clean, cold silence he usually cherished. The fragile peace shattered a week later. He returned at dusk to a silent, empty cabin. A cold fear, sharp and entirely unfamiliar, seized him. He was saddling his horse in a blind panic when she emerged from the trail to the north, a pail of fresh milk in her hand. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice rough with a relief he couldn't afford to show. "At the Boone place. Traded some mending for milk and eggs. Calvin's wife died in the spring. He's lonely." She looked at him, challengingly. "You don't visit," he says. "Not since the funeral." "I help," Jasper said, defensive. "I chop his wood, check his snares. Useful, silent things that required no talking." "I don't doubt it," she said, her voice softening a fraction. "But there's more than one way to help a person." She paused, watching him. "He invited us to Sunday dinner. I accepted." "You what?" "I don't do calls." "You do now," she said, pleasant and immovable as granite. "We're married. That means we operate as a team. Your hermit season is over." They fought then, truly fought. He said he hadn't asked for a wife to redraw the map of his life. She said he had a wife, like it or not, and wives came with expectations of civilized behavior. "Civilized," he shot back, heat rising in his chest. "I live civilized." "Hiding isn't civilized," she retorted, her own temper flaring. "It's cowardice." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. He stood, his chair skidding back, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He was close enough to see the slight flare of fear in her eyes, to see the quick beat of her pulse at the base of her throat. He could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "I call it minding my own business," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You might try it." "This is my business," she whispered, not giving an inch. "I live here. I won't be a cave wife to suit your quiet." They held each other's gaze, the air between them brittle enough to shatter. He could have flung more words, could have unleashed the storm of his frustration. But instead, the fight drained out of him as suddenly as it had come, leaving a hollow, aching truth behind. "I didn't see it that way," he said, the admission costing him. "I know," she replied, simply. He took her to town on Saturday. He watched, a silent sentinel, as she charmed the storekeeper, Otis, into better bulk prices and talked him into ordering spices he'd never stock, all while making him believe the idea was his own. He saw the way she moved through the small crowd, how she listened, truly listened to people, her green eyes missing nothing. On the ride back, the silence between them was different, softer. "Regrets?" he asked, the wagon wheels crunching a steady rhythm beneath them. She watched the mountains, their peaks painted by the setting sun. "I miss the hum of a town," she admitted, the sense of being part of something, but no, not yet. Then she looked at him, her gaze direct and unguarded for the first time. "I need to build something, Jasper. I don't know how yet, but I will." That night, as she sketched lists by firelight, supplies, improvements, names, and needs, Jasper watched her conjure visions from pencil and paper. He felt the old resistance rise, the instinct to fortify his walls. But then he looked at her, face, illuminated and intent, and he made a choice. He wouldn't just let her build. He would build with her. A practical bargain, tested by 2 stubborn wills. But the true test wasn't their own tempers. It was the past hunting her down. If you're listening now, feeling that shift from irritation to something deeper, then you understand the quiet hope warring with Jasper's dread. Where are you right now, listening to this story unfold? Tell me in the comments. And if you need to know what or who was following Marigold Ash out of Missouri, you need to hit that subscribe button, because the wolf is at the door, and the next part is where he howls. The change in the air was as subtle as the first shift in the wind before a thunderhead rolls over the ridge. For 3 weeks, a fragile truce had settled over the cabin. Jasper found himself anticipating the smell of coffee and fresh bread when he came in from the trap lines. Marigold's rearrangements of his kitchen no longer felt like an invasion, but an evolution. They were learning the silent language of shared space, their conversations shifting from skirmishes to negotiations. It was Marigold who broached the next frontier. "Otis says prepared furs bring a premium price in the spring," she mentioned one evening, not looking up from her mending. "The women in town want butter and cheese. The nearest dairy is 50 miles away." Jasper grunted, the sound less a refusal and more an acknowledgement. "That's a herd of its own to manage." "Opportunity usually is," she replied, her needle flashing in the firelight. "We start small. We learn." He watched her. This woman who saw a future in a block of churned milk and a stretched pelt. He was a man who understood the land, its immediate give and take. She was teaching him to see its potential. It was both thrilling and terrifying. The following Thursday, she returned from a day helping Ruthie Hale at the boarding house, her cheeks flushed with the cold and something else, a quiet triumph. "Ruthie's nephew is a wheelwright in Cheyenne. He's looking for reliable sources of high-grade pelts. She gave me his direction." She held out a slip of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. Jasper took it, his rough fingers brushing against hers. A simple touch, yet it sent a current through him that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. "You move fast." "I have to," she said, her gaze steady. "I told you, I'm building." He believed her, and for the first time, the thought of that future didn't make him want to retreat into the pines. It made him want to build it alongside her. The crack that shattered this new, delicate understanding came on a day that had dawned with uncommon promise. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, and the sun held a faint whisper of warmth. Jasper had spent the morning building a proper smokehouse, the project a physical manifestation of their budding partnership. Marigold was inside, humming as she experimented with a new bread recipe. The sound of a single horse approaching at a slow, deliberate walk was what caught his attention. It wasn't the hurried clip of Calvin Boone's old mare or the familiar creak of Otis's supply wagon. This was different, ominous. The rider came into view, a big man on a powerful bay gelding. He wore a long, trail-worn coat, but it was the glint of a silver star pinned to his vest that made Jasper's blood run cold. The man reined in, his eyes, flat and assessing as a snake's, swept over the cabin, the new smokehouse. Jasper, missing nothing. He tipped his hat back, revealing a face that was all hard planes and a thin, unsmiling mouth. "Afternoon," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "You Jasper Cole?" "I am." Jasper didn't move from his place by the half-raised wall of the smokehouse, his hand resting near the hammer in his tool belt. The man's gaze drifted past him, toward the cabin door. "I'm looking for a woman. Goes by the name of Marigold Ash. Heard she might be in these parts." At that moment, the cabin door opened. Marigold stepped out, a question on her lips that died the second she saw the rider. The color drained from her face so completely, she looked like a specter. The bowl she was holding slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered on the porch steps, scattering flour like fallen snow. "Silas," she whispered, the name a choked breath. The man, Silas, smiled. It was a cold, terrible thing that didn't touch his eyes. "There you are, darling. Been a long hunt?" His eyes flicked back to Jasper. "I'm Sheriff Silas Rourke, and it seems you've been harboring my wife." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her husband is dead. The lie echoed in Jasper's mind, sharp and brittle. He looked at Marigold, at the sheer, unvarnished terror in her eyes, and knew that while the words had been a lie, the fear was the truest thing he'd ever seen. "She told me her husband was dead," Jasper said, his voice dangerously calm. Rourke chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Did she now? Well, I can assure you, I'm very much alive. She ran off after a disagreement, took something that didn't belong to her." His flat eyes pinned Marigold. "A substantial sum from my strongbox. A lifetime of savings." He's lying! The words burst from Marigold, fueled by a desperate courage. The money was blood money, Jasper. Bribes from rustlers, kickbacks from every crooked dealing in the county. I took it because it was the only way I could ever be free of him. He wasn't a husband. He was a jailer. Rourke's smile vanished. A pretty story for the man you tricked into bigamy. Who do you think a territorial judge will believe? A decorated sheriff or a thieving, lying adulteress? He turned his dead-eyed gaze back to Jasper. I'm a reasonable man. You hand her over and the money she stole, and I ride out of here. We forget this bigamous misunderstanding ever happened. You can go back to your quiet life. The air grew thick, charged with the promise of violence. Jasper could feel the weight of his rifle just inside the cabin door. He could feel the fragility of the life he and Marigold had just begun to build cracking under the boot heel of this man. This is her home, Jasper said, the words final. She's under my protection. You're trespassing. Rourke's jaw tightened. The civility melted away, revealing the brute beneath. Protection? You're a trapper living on a rock. I am the law. I'll be back, and I won't be alone. I'll come with a federal marshal and a writ of arrest. I'll take her. I'll take the money, and I'll see you in chains for interfering with justice. You have 1 week. He yanked his horse's reins, the animal spinning on its haunches. He didn't look back as he rode down the trail, leaving a silence deeper and more profound than any Jasper had ever known on his ridge. The moment he was gone, Marigold crumpled, sinking onto the porch steps amidst the shattered pottery and spilled flour. Sobs racked her frame, the sounds of a soul being torn apart. Jasper went to her, not with soft words, but with a grim, steady presence. He knelt, waiting. When the storm passed, the story came out in ragged pieces. Silas Rourke, the respected sheriff of Laramie County, the slow, chilling realization of his corruption, the isolation, the control, the fear, the final desperate gamble, overhearing the location of his hidden strongbox, taking the $5,000 in marked bills, and running with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's medical satchel. He'll kill me, Jasper, she whispered, her voice hollow. He won't bring me to a judge. He'll hang me from a tree and call it an accident, or shoot me and claim I resisted. That money is his proof. Without it, he's just an angry husband. With it, he's the law. Jasper looked at this woman, the sharp tongue, the fierce will, the hidden kindness, and saw not a liar, but a survivor. The betrayal he'd felt was now a cold, focused anger, directed entirely at the man riding down his mountain. The money, Jasper said, his voice low and practical. Where is it? Her eyes widened in fresh fear. Why? Because he's right about one thing. He is the law. We can't fight him with a rifle, not without ending up on the wrong end of a rope ourselves. We need leverage. Where is it, Marigold? She swallowed hard, her trust in him a fragile, newfound thing. I buried it in a metal box, a day's ride east of here, near a lightning-struck pine at the head of the Red Canyon. I was going to use it to start over. Before you decided to stay, he finished for her. She nodded, tears welling again. I'm so sorry. I brought this down on you. He stood, pulling her up with him. Her hands were ice cold in his. We're a team, he said, echoing her own words back to her. You don't face this alone. He looked toward the trail where Rourke had disappeared. He thinks he's given us a week to panic. He's wrong. He's given us a week to prepare for war. The next days were a whirlwind of grim activity. The partnership they had been building was now a war council. Jasper rode to Calvin Boone's place, not for a social call, but for information. Did Calvin know anything about a Sheriff Rourke nosing around? Calvin, wide-eyed, confirmed a lawman had been in Iron Creek a few days prior, asking quiet questions about a new woman in the territory. Jasper didn't confide the whole story, but he saw the understanding in Calvin's eyes. The code of the mountains was simple. A man's home was his castle. When Jasper left, Calvin simply said, You need an extra hand. You send word. Meanwhile, Marigold worked with a frantic energy. She sorted her medicines, preparing poultices and packets of herbs with a soldier's efficiency. She inventoried their food supplies, calculated how long they could last a siege. The practical bride was gone, replaced by a strategist. The tension between them was no longer about where to put the coffee tin. It was a shared wire, thrumming with dread and resolve. They spoke in clipped, efficient sentences, their movements coordinated. They were building again, but this time they were building bulwarks. 4 days after Rourke's visit, the second blow fell. Otis Crane from the general store rode up, his face pale and his horse lathered. "Jasper," he said, gasping for breath. "A federal marshal rode into town this morning. He's staying at the hotel. Rourke is with him." The legal noose was tightening. That night, sitting by the fire, the plan was formed. It was desperate, but it was all they had. "I have to go," Jasper said, staring into the flames. "I have to get to that money before Rourke does. It's the only proof we have." "Alone? It's a day's ride. What if Rourke is watching the trails? He expects us to cower here, or for me to make a stupid move. He won't expect me to slip out and go straight for the one thing he wants." He looked at her, his expression grave. "I need you to stay here. If anyone comes, you know nothing. You're just a new bride, frightened and confused." The thought of him leaving, of facing the wilderness and Rourke's posses alone, terrified her more than Silas's arrival. But she saw the steel in his eyes. This was the man who had built this cabin, the man who didn't take what wasn't offered. He was offering her his protection, and it was a thing of substance, as solid as the logs around them. "All right," she whispered. He left an hour before dawn, a shadow melting into the graying dark. Marigold stood in the doorway, watching him vanish, the weight of the silent waiting cabin pressing in on her. She was alone again, just as she had been in Missouri. But this time it was different. This time someone was riding out for her, not to claim her, but to fight for her. The sun rose, casting long, accusing shadows. Every snap of a twig, every call of a jay made her heart leap into her throat. She moved through the day in a haze of fear, jumping at her own shadow. The cozy home they had built now felt like a trap, its windows like eyes, its silence a scream waiting to happen. As evening began to bleed across the sky, she heard it. Not the single horse of a returning husband, but the unmistakable sound of multiple riders. Approaching fast, her breath caught. Jasper couldn't be back so soon. She ran to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, and at the front, his face a mask of cold triumph, was Silas Rourke. He reined in just yards from the porch, his 2 companions, hard-faced men she didn't recognize, flanking him. He'd called their bluff. He hadn't waited the week. Rourke smiled, that same cold, terrible smile. "Hello, darling. Miss me?" He gestured to the empty yard. "Where's your husband? Out on the trap lines?" His voice dripped with mockery. "No matter. We can wait." He dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. "In fact, why don't you invite us in? We have a lot to discuss about what belongs to me." Marigold stood frozen, the door the only thing between her and the wolf. And the wolf was no longer at the door. He was on the porch. The trap has been sprung. Jasper is gone, racing against time for the one thing that can save them. Marigold is alone, facing the monster from her past, who has finally found his prey. If your heart is pounding right now, you're not alone. Where are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. And if you cannot bear the thought of leaving Marigold alone with that man, then you must subscribe. The final explosive conclusion is coming in the next part. Silas Rourke's bootsteps were deliberate hammers on the porch planks, each one a nail in the coffin of Marigold's courage. The 2 men with him, a hulking brute and a lean weasel-faced character, fanned out, blocking any hope of flight. The cabin, her sanctuary, had become a cage. "Invite us in, Marigold," Silas repeated, his voice a low, venomous purr. It wasn't a request. It was a command, a reassertion of the ownership he'd always claimed over her. Her mind, frozen with terror, snapped into a sharp, crystalline clarity. This was the moment her mother had prepared her for, not with poultices and bandages, but with a quiet, steely resolve. "When a cornered animal has no escape, my girl," she'd said, "it must become something the hunter never expected." Marigold did not open the door. She lifted her chin, meeting Silas's gaze through the glass pane. "You're not welcome here, Sheriff," she said, her voice not a shout, but carrying the sharp edge of finality. "This is my home. You are trespassing." A flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossed Rourke's face. He was used to her cowering. This defiance was anew. "Your home?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You are a thief and a bigamist. You have no rights. Now open this door before I lose my patience." "I have a marriage certificate that says otherwise," she lied, her heart thundering against her ribs. She prayed the bluff would hold. "My husband will be back shortly. I suggest you and your companions leave before there's trouble." The weasel-faced man chuckled. "Husband's not here, lady. We watched him ride out at first light, headed east in a powerful hurry." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into her geranium pot. "Real curious where he's off to." The confirmation that they were being watched, that Jasper's mission was known, sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. Silas's smile returned, wider now, savoring his advantage. "He's gone for the money, isn't he? Saving me the trouble. Now, are you opening this door, or do I let Eli here remove it from the hinges?" The big man, Eli, cracked his knuckles, a sound like snapping twigs. "Trapped. Cornered." Marigold's eyes darted around the single room, landing on the cast-iron stove, the kettle of water she'd just set to boil for tea. An idea, desperate and wild, formed. She took a step back, making a show of reluctance. "All right," she said, her voice trembling convincingly. "All right, just don't break anything." She unlatched the door and pulled it open, stepping quickly behind it, using it as a shield. As Silas strode in, his arrogance making him careless, she reached for the kettle. It happened in a blur. Silas, expecting submission, stepped fully inside. The weasel-faced man followed. In that split second, as Eli the brute began to cross the threshold, Marigold swung the door with all her strength. The solid oak edge caught him square in the face with a sickening crunch of cartilage. He roared, stumbling back, hands flying to his gushing nose. Simultaneously, she hurled the contents of the boiling kettle. It wasn't aimed at Silas, who was too far. It was aimed at the weasel-faced man. The scalding water caught him in the chest and arm. He screamed, a high, shrill sound of pure agony, clawing at his soaked shirt. The cabin erupted into chaos. Silas, momentarily stunned by the sudden violence, fumbled for his gun. Marigold didn't wait. She dropped the kettle, snatched the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, and swung it in a wild arc. It connected with Silas's drawing arm. He grunted in pain, his revolver clattering to the floor and skittering under the table. "You hellcat!" he snarled, lunging for her. She was already moving, diving for the rifle above the mantel. Her fingers closed around the cold, familiar wood, just as a hand grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her backward. Eli, his face a mask of blood, had recovered. He threw her to the floor like a rag doll. The air rushed from her lungs. She looked up, dazed, to see Silas retrieving his gun, his eyes burning with murderous rage. The game was up. He wasn't here to arrest her anymore. "I should have done this a long time ago," he hissed, leveling the revolver at her head. "A day's ride, a day's ride, a day's ride." The mantra pounded in Jasper's skull in time with his horse's hooves. He had ridden through the day without rest, pushing himself and the animal to their absolute limits. The landscape was a blur of rock and pine. The only thing that mattered was the lightning-struck pine, the metal box, and the terror he had left behind. He found the canyon as the sun began to dip below the rim, casting long, distorted shadows. His heart hammered, not from the ride, but from a primal, gut-deep fear for her. He saw the tree, a skeletal finger pointing an accusation at the sky. He fell to his knees, digging like a madman with his hands and a piece of splintered wood, ignoring the tearing of his nails. His fingers finally struck metal. He dragged the box out, pried it open. There, bundled in oilcloth, were the bills, the proof. He didn't pause. He shoved the money into his saddlebag, mounted his exhausted horse, and turned its head toward home. The return ride was a nightmare of imagined horrors. Every minute felt like an hour. Had Rourke come early? Was he already too late? The thought of finding the cabin empty, or worse, drove him on. a cold, relentless fury giving him strength. He approached the ridge from the high trail, the one that overlooked the cabin from behind. He dismounted, moving on foot, his rifle in his hand. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. 3 horses tethered outside, and from within, the sounds of a struggle. He didn't think. He acted. He burst through the back door just as Silas Rourke stood over Marigold, his revolver aimed. The scene registered in an instant. Marigold on the floor, the brute holding her, the other man writhing in pain, the fury on Rourke's face. "Rourke!" Jasper's voice cracked through the cabin like a whip. Silas spun, his eyes widening in shock. He was fast, but Jasper was already moving. He didn't aim for a clean shot. He fired from the hip. The rifle roared. The bullet took Rourke high in the shoulder, spinning him around. His own shot went wild, splintering the wall. Eli, the brute, released Marigold and went for his own gun. Jasper worked the rifle's lever, the spent cartridge clinking to the floor. He didn't fire. He simply pointed the barrel at the man's chest. "Don't!" The fight went out of Eli. He slowly raised his hands. Silas Rourke was on his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a contortion of pain and hatred. "You're dead, Cole. You're both dead. I am the law." Jasper walked forward, his bootsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He looked down at the man who had tried to steal his future. "Not here. You're not." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the bundled money. He tossed it onto the floor in front of Rourke. The oilcloth fell away, revealing the bound stacks of cash. "There's your proof," Jasper said, his voice cold as mountain stone. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your money and your men, and you're going to ride out of this territory. And you are never going to come back. You are never going to look for her again." Rourke stared at the money, then back at Jasper, disbelief warring with his rage. "Or what?" Jasper knelt, bringing his face close to Rourke's. "Or I take this money, and I ride to the territorial capital, and I give it to a judge, along with a sworn statement from my wife about where it came from. I wonder how your decorated reputation will stand up to that kind of scrutiny, Sheriff." The truth of it dawned in Rourke's eyes. He was beaten. The money was no longer his leverage. It was his noose. He could either disappear with his ill-gotten gains or face a reckoning that would end his career and likely his life. Defeated, he gave a curt, pained nod. Jasper stood. "Get him out of my sight." Eli and the weasel-faced man, cowed and injured, helped the stumbling Silas Rourke to his feet and out the door. They mounted up and rode down the trail, a broken and bloody procession, without a backward glance. Jasper turned. Marigold was still on the floor, shaking, her hand pressed to her mouth. He went to her, his own adrenaline fading, leaving him trembling. He knelt and gathered her into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, her whole body shuddering with the release of terror. "You came back," she whispered, the words muffled against his coat. "I told you I would," he said, holding her tighter. "I will always come back." They sat there on the floor of their battle-scarred home as the last light of day faded, holding on to each other, as if they were the only solid things left in a world that had tried to break them. The threat was gone. The lie was gone. All that remained was the raw, unvarnished truth of what they had chosen to fight for. In the weeks that followed, the cabin was repaired. The blood was scrubbed from the floorboards. The splintered door jamb was replaced. But the memory of the fight didn't fade. It settled into the foundations of their life together, a grim reminder of what they had survived. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars pierce the velvet sky, Marigold's hand rested on her stomach. She looked at Jasper, her green eyes clear and calm. "I'm with child?" she said softly. He looked at her, the news landing not as a shock, but as the final perfect piece of their future clicking into place. The legacy they had almost lost. He took her hand, lacing his rough fingers with her slender ones. "We'll call him Samuel," he said, "after my father, a man who knew how to build things that last." She smiled, a true deep smile that reached her eyes. "Samuel Cole," she said, testing the sound of it. "A good, strong name." Below them, in the darkening valley, A new herd of cattle, their herd, grazed contentedly. The sound was a quiet promise of tomorrow. They had faced the wolf and won. They had paid for their bargain not with coin, but with courage, and in doing so had built something far more valuable than safety or shelter. They had built a love as solid and enduring as the ridge itself. From a desperate bargain to a battle for survival, their story is a testament to the fact that the strongest loves are often forged in the hottest fires. If this tale of resilience found a home in your heart, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And for more stories of forged steel and unbreakable bonds in the wild places, make sure to subscribe. The frontier is vast, and every corner holds a new legend.